Hi, today we're going to continue learning about LT5, but we are going to focus on solar, biofuel, and geothermal energy alternatives. So in our class, we've been talking about how we get energy and how the energy travels into our homes. And particularly, we've been talking about electricity. So we're going to continue talking about different ways we can power our homes through natural resources. Let's first start talking about geothermal power. Geothermal power is electricity that's generated by the heat from the Earth's crust. This is a picture of a geothermal plant. How does geothermal power work? Rainwater sinks into the cracks where magma is. The magma can heat the water and make steam, which can then escape through natural vents or cracks in the earth. Power plants can collect the steam to spin a turbine, which is connected to a generator which can generate electricity. Geothermal energy can also be used directly to heat homes. So what are some of the advantages of using geothermal energy? First, it doesn't require a lot of cost. So it's low cost, it's very renewable, there's no pollution, and this picture kind of shows you they just emit water vapor. It has very little damage to the natural environment because all it's doing is collecting the natural steam from natural vents in the Earth's crust. It could also be used for direct heating, so you don't need extra electricity to heat your home, and it also creates lots of jobs for workers. Some of the disadvantages of using geothermal power is that geothermal vents like these, the natural vents, are not found everywhere. So there's only so many power plants that we can build. We can also run out of steam if there's changes in temperature within the Earth's crust. It's very expensive to build the power plant, so there's a high initial investment cost. The steam can dissolve some minerals and harmful chemicals in the Earth's crust found around here, and that can potentially rain back down on ecosystems, and that could damage the ecosystems. Sometimes the power plants will dump hot water into fresh lakes and streams, and that could actually harm the ecosystems for fish and plants that are very sensitive to temperature. And this is what this picture is showing you. These are some scientists that are testing and seeing the effects of the different water temperature on fish that live here. But lastly, the other disadvantage is that you cannot transport the energy to other locations. So with fossil fuels, you can actually gather it and then trade it with other countries or transport it to other locations. But in geothermal, you can't really transfer the energy easily because you have to build the power plant where the geothermal vent is. In the United States, geothermal energy accounts for only 2% out of the 9% of renewable energy that we do consume. And in the rest of the world, geothermal energy is only about 0.049% of the whole total energy consumption, which is a very small amount. Now let's talk about biomass power or biopower. Biopower is basically electricity that's generated from plants and animals. And this picture just shows you the different sources of plant and animal residue that can actually become biomass power. So they can come from waste, they can come from animal waste products, waste products from forests, agriculture, and even sewage. How does biomass power or biopower work? One of the most common ways that we can generate electricity from biomass is combustion. Combustion is the act of burning something to generate heat and steam. So wood and other organic waste products are burned to produce steam, and that can spin a turbine and generate electricity. Most, most things that are combusted are actually plant matter. And this picture just shows you some of the things that can be processed in an electricity power plant to produce electricity from biomass. The other way that biopower can generate electricity is through anaerobic digestion. Anaerobic means without oxygen, So there's bacteria cells that can decompose organic waste without oxygen to produce methane and other gases. And this picture shows you another word for methane and other gases is biogas. This gas can be used to make fuel, thermal energy, which can make electricity. What are the advantages of using biomass energy? First of all, there's no harmful pollution because everything that's being burned or used in biomass came from nature once. So there's very little harmful pollution involved. It's renewable. Uh, it could be used to make fuel for cars, such as ethanol or biodiesel and many other products. And this is a picture of a pump where there's ethanol, which is a type of alcohol-based fuel that's made from corn, and that could be used to power cars. It's very easy to obtain anywhere in the world because you find biomass everywhere. Finally, it reduces waste from the landfill. So some of the waste that potentially goes into landfills can actually be used to harness energy using the biomass plants. So that can decrease the waste in our landfills. Now let's talk about the disadvantages of using biomass power. First of all, it's very expensive and not efficient. There's very little energy release. So to release the same amount of energy for a car, for instance, to run, you would need a lot more of biofuel in order to make that same car run. And that requires a huge investment of time making the crops, a huge investment of the land and water, and the cost is a lot higher to make these biofuels. Second, the land used to make the biofuels is also needed to make food for us. So that's another disadvantage. Burning some biofuel or using anaerobic digestion can release methane and some carbon dioxide, which still are global greenhouse gases that can increase global warming. Finally, methane can be very smelly, that can attract flies and pests more often, and that can actually spread more disease. So that's another disadvantage. Overall, in the United States, biomass is actually one of the biggest ways we use renewable energy. So renewable energy is only 9%, but out of the 9%, 48% is actually biomass. So now if you look at the rest of the world, biomass is also one of the most common ways of using renewable resources. So if you take a look at this, renewable resources is 19% of the total energy consumption in the world, but if you break it down, this huge amount right here, 9%, is actually traditional biomass. And that's because a lot of people in the developing world burn things like wood for fire, and it's a very common way to get energy. Bioheat is 2.6%. Ethanol, biodiesel, biopower generation is less than 1%. So it's up and coming, but the traditional way of using biomass is to burn plant products for energy in the world. Now let's talk about solar power. Solar power is when you use the sun's energy to generate electricity. How does solar power work? So solar power involves what we call photovoltaic cells or PV cells. They're made out of silicon, and basically they are able to capture the sun's rays. Once the sun's rays touch the silicon cells, electrons inside of these cells begin to get excited and move around. The wires behind these cells capture these electrons moving, and they can generate electricity and power homes and buildings and whatnot. In the United States, solar is actually only 1% out of the total 9% of renewable resources. It's the least common way of getting energy. In the rest of the world, it's also a very small amount of energy being produced, so less than 1%. Let's look at what are the advantages of using solar power. First of all, it's renewable, so we're not going to be running out of the sun's energy for quite some time, billions of years. It produces less pollution. And the solar panels don't need a lot of maintenance and they don't break very easily. If you compare solar panels to windmills, windmills actually break a lot easier and wear down a lot faster than solar panels. So that's another advantage. It's also very quiet. So windmills are known to kind of be very noisy, but solar power plants are very quiet. They don't make any noise, so it's favorable in that sense. The disadvantages of using solar power is that first, it's very, very expensive to build the panels. Um, then the energy can only be generated during sunny days. So if there's a cloudy coverage of the sun or if it's during night, you can't produce any electricity. Second, right now it's very inefficient still. Only 20% of the sun's rays that initially hit the solar panels get captured and turned into electricity. Silicon, which makes the cells, requires a ton of natural resources to build. So one small silicon chip actually needs gallons and gallons of water. So we have to use other natural resources, a ton of them, just to make this. Finally, uh, these cells require a lot of mining for natural resources. So for the metals and for the silicon, and that mining action can actually damage the ecosystems. So those are the disadvantages.